2 minutes,
and
2.5 minutes.
You have to turn the camera around.
There we go. Good.
Okay, cool.
2.5 minutes. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We've got about 2 minutes before we're going to start the live stream. So why don't you guys come on in and hang out. I'm going to start out here and do a little introduction. I'll come on in and then I'll introduce you to whoever's online. And if you would applaud, that would be great. And then we'll start the tour. Okay. Although I can't call it a tour, we'll start the walkthrough. It's a story behind that, but that's okay. So come on in, guys. If you wouldn't mind, Chris, are you doing Reg? If you would just let Chris know that you're here so we can know you're here. How are we doing? Minute
18 out.
All right. Well, I think you and I should start outside again, and then we'll walk in. So let's do that. I'm going to sneak by you. Hey.
How's it going, brother?
It's going. We've got a minute to go before we start.
Yeah, sorry. We dropped these off to Ashley. They're the T-shirt club, and they refunded them because they don't fit for me.
Right.
I never wore them, so maybe you guys can sell them.
Okay. You want thanks? You want to do it against the door?
No, I'm just showing the generic without 48 seconds.
All right. What?
Just they saw the triple that I showed, so
yeah.
I'm just going with a generic. And greetings, Carol from Manchester.
There you go. There you go. Well, we've got an audience for whatever it's 15. Worth, right? All right.
10.
Hey, hello to everybody on Heygo. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I'm Ray Tesi. I'm the owner of Neutral Zone Studios. And we're going to do something a little different than we did last week. Last week, we did a walkthrough and sort of showed you what it would be like to either film an episode or walk on a starship. But we're going to actually do a walkthrough today. And I'm going to be giving you hopefully some cool and interesting information about Star Trek's past, about the construction of the studio. And I hope it's going to be entertaining and informational. So let's get started right away. And if you guys would follow me inside, I would appreciate it. Morning, guys. How are you? Welcome again. Welcome again. So we're doing, I mentioned to everybody that we're doing a live stream, but these are guests that are here to actually go through the tour with us. So guys, you're on live stream. We know we've got at least one person from Manchester, so we're international. So just say hi to everybody from Heygo, if you wouldn't mind. There we go. Thank you, guys. So let me give you a little bit of a background of the studio. Who is here? You're here for the first time. I know that. First time? First time? No, you guys have been back before, and you've been here. I know. So a little bit background of the studio. We started at a much smaller location, which is just down the road from us in an area called St. Mary's. We're in Kingsland, Georgia, which is the next town over. Started with just a couple of sets. It started with part of the bridge, a little bit of a transporter room, and I think a bit of a corridor. And it was started by a fan film group called Starship Farragut. And Farragut wanted to film an episode of Star Trek. They asked Vic Mignogna, who we'll talk about in just a bit, but he's the showrunner for Star Trek Continues. But they asked Vic to come and help out. And the idea was when he was done, they would allow him to film something as well, because he only wanted to really film one episode. As it turns out, Farragut filmed their episode, and the building got sold. So they had to move. They were going to put their sets in storage. And so Vic came up with the idea, let's see if we can find something bigger. Let's take your sets over there. Let's see if we could build around it. And they found this building, which was nothing but a slab when it started. It's about 10,000 square feet, so it's fairly large. Vic took the blueprints from Paramount in 1966 and basically scoped out where everything should go. Here was where the corridor goes. Here's Dr. McCoy's office. Here's the transporter room, whatever it happens to be. So he scoped everything out. And then a big group of volunteers. We've got a couple here now, but Dan Scanlon is behind the camera. And we've got a bunch of folks. But they've all been working on construction in this building as early as 2011, I believe, right up until May of this year when we installed the main view screen, which I'm very excited to show everybody. So that's a little bit of the history. For you guys here, and you know my speech, you know, it's and for you guys on Heygo, I don't charge people to come in. I don't think money should be a deciding factor in playing Star Trek. I just don't. But if you like what you see and you'd like to leave a donation, we'd appreciate it. If you guys would like at the end, if you're happy with what you see and you leave us a tip, that would be well appreciated as well. So we're going to get started. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of background before we go into our first set. So Star Trek in 1966 was all about saving money. That was their main goal, was to save money, because it was very expensive. You know, you've got to think about it. You know, most of the shows at the time were Westerns, and they might have been police shows and situation comedies. And so you've got plenty of sets, plenty of costumes. It's just everyday dress. Star Trek had to invent the future. So it was going to be very expensive and costly to do. When they started, Lucille Ball, who is the creator of Desilu, who produced Star Trek, wanted a show that was going to be very different for television. And she found two. One was Star Trek, and the other one was Mission Impossible. So her advisors said, Lucy, don't do Star Trek, because Star Trek is going to bankrupt your company. It's just going to be too expensive to do. But she went ahead with it anyway. Some of you may know it was canceled after 2 years, and it was brought back for a third season. As it turns out, Desilu went bankrupt. But she is the godmother of Star Trek. But again, it was all about saving money when they were filming, because they were just trying to get an episode on the air every week. So they came up with an idea, for example, of sliding doors, right? So as someone approached the doors, they would slide open, and they'd go in, they'd slide closed. Now, many of you are going to say, hey, I was just at Target, or I was at my local supermarket, and the doors open and close all the time. Well, 55 years ago, that technology didn't exist. So they came up with this ideas of pulling the doors open. So that was their first innovation. And we'll talk about a number of them as we go through. So let's get started with the tour. Our first set is going to be right here, and this is engineering. So let's all go into engineering. Come on in, guys. And you can go all the way down to the end. So comment we usually get when people first walk into engineering is it looks smaller than you imagine. It's actually built to scale. It's actually built to scale. What was different is that wall that's behind you guys would not have been there. That's where your cameras would have been. That's where your crew and your director would have been. So it was a bigger space. Unfortunately, that's another part of our building that was sold to another company, and that company makes egg rolls. So if you get hungry, it's not my fault, because they're probably working today. So that would really be the only difference in the room. First thing that probably catches your eye is the warp core. The warp core is built with something called forced perspective. So forced perspective means as things go back further in view, they get smaller and smaller. And it gives the illusion of depth. So if you're looking at this from a distance or you're looking at this through a camera, you might look at that and say, it's got to be 20, 25, some people even guess 30 feet long. It's actually only 12 feet long, but it gives the impression that it goes back further. So Paramount built it in the same fashion, so they didn't have to build a time tunnel. People didn't have to walk into it. There are lots of items that are used and still available today, and we're going to talk about those. But there are items that are no longer available. 55 years later, there are certain things that just can't be found any longer. So the first thing we'll talk about is this hexagonal mesh that's up here. And this is steel. This is steel, and it's very heavy, and it would take many people, it took many people to bring it in, and it would take many people to take it out. You could probably imagine Kirk hanging off of one of these, trying to wrestle Khan to the ground. But what is it? What is it? What is this material? It's actually a form of rebar. And if you're not familiar with rebar, they're metal sticks or shafts that go into large concrete pores. And it keeps the concrete from cracking after it's dry. So if you're somewhere driving and you see a large conduit holding up a roadway, odds are there's something like this, if not this, inside to keep it solid. And then you guys can see what the inside of the warp core looks like. Next thing is to take a look at the ceiling. So the ceiling, which, you know, there are several engineering rooms that have been created, but to my knowledge, and I will say to my knowledge, this is the only one that has a second story ceiling because there was enough room to do it here. And if you look at Star Trek and you see an upshot in engineering, that's this whole area is exactly what you would see. When they started conceiving to build the ceiling, they started building it out of conventional material. So 2x4s, plywood, all of that. So they built one of the arches down on the floor. And when they were done, they went to pick it up and move it out and decided it's too heavy. It's just not going to be safe. How would we get it up there? How would we secure it? And if it ever fell, whoever was in the room, you know, wouldn't survive. So they thought that they wouldn't be able to build the ceiling. Royal Weaver, who's here today, and he's been with the studio for about 13 years, he told Vic and company that he thought there was a person in Jacksonville, which is a city right down the road from us, that could, if you could make a 3D CAD model on computer, on PC, and give him that model, he can build it in exactly the shape that you design, in whatever dimensions you want, out of styrofoam. So that whole ceiling is styrofoam. So if that ceiling were to come down, you and I could probably carry it out of here. It's just that light. And Dan was here during the construction, and he's got stories, which he'll tell you later, of climbing a ladder with a piece of ceiling in his hand and people just wiring it to the ceiling. But that is very, very light. So that person became known as Mr. Styrofoam Man. And if he could make the ceiling out of styrofoam, what else could he make out of styrofoam? So, for example, these tops are styrofoam. They are styrofoam. Now, you might look at these and say, well, wait a minute, they're garbage pail covers. Well, they're really not, because if you go to your local home goods store and you look at garbage pails, well, there's handles on them and there's designs on them. So they're not really garbage pail covers. And these have been coated so that I can't put my fingers through it. But that was styrofoam. In addition, all of these items that are up on the wall, all of these items have been printed out of styrofoam. And again, this is what you would have seen. These items, by the way, are called plantons. They're called plantons. Why are they called plantons? Because you find something that looks cool, you paint it so it looks like it's the future, and you plant it on the wall. So they're plantons. The example I use on things that are available today and not available today are these two gray conduits up on the wall. So printing things on a CAD program in styrofoam is great for the 21st century, but that wouldn't have worked 55 years ago because that technology just didn't exist. So what did they do at Paramount? Well, at the end of the day, when everybody else went home, the Paramount production people would go dumpster diving, meaning they would just go into garbage pails looking for things that look cool. And they'd find something, they'd paint it, and they'd put it up on the wall, and voila, we had the future. These two items that Dan was showing you before, that's the example I use of what they would have originally been. So those items would have actually been the packing material that would have held inside a box an IBM Selectric typewriter. So the question is, can you find an IBM Selectric typewriter today? And if you found it, would it be new in box? Probably not. So this was a real boon to help make things. And as we go through, we'll see other things as well. But to be able to make things that look just like Star Trek, that would give the illusion that, you know, you guys are at Paramount in 1966. Last thing I just want to talk about is the island in the center. And this was an afterthought originally. If you go back and you look at Star Trek in the first season and you look at the first few episodes, this island was not in engineering. It was designed so that it would look like it was somehow controlling the warp core. And in fact, this is the dilithium chamber. And they came up with these ideas of spheres around the side to give it that futuristic look. Now, these are the spheres that we're using here today, which some of you will probably recognize as a garden decoration. You just buy these and put them in your garden. But I bought these because of the shine, and I was hoping they would last a long time in the heat and humidity. And so far, I've guessed right. So that's good. But that's not what they used in 1966 or even on Star Trek Continues. What they used were these. So what are these? Just balls. This one happens to be Minions. This is Minions, right? So William Shatner would come into film and engineering, and he'd start kicking these around like they were balls, and everybody would say, "Bill, that's a model, you know, a set." And he didn't care; he'd kick them around, so they'd have to repaint them and put them back. But this is exactly what they would have used. So the other idea, the other thing to mention, again, Star Trek was about saving money, so they would try to repurpose things. So these balls were repurposed into something else. Some of the guys here know, some of you may know on Heygo. But these were actually used as Horta eggs in Devil in the Dark. And they made a couple of porcelain models so they could break them and look like the egg was broken open. But the rest of what you saw in the background were just these balls colored in different colors. By the way, for everybody here, everybody online, I love questions. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask questions. We love pictures. If you post pictures on social media, just tag us, #Neutral Zone Studios. Any questions? Any questions there, Dan? No questions. All right, let's move on. So we're back here out in the corridor. And this is going to be the entrance to our main section. And Dan, before we open the doors, I'm going to ask you to come up front. Let's get everybody come on out. Let's get our new guys. You're new.
Yeah.
I want you up front and come on out. And you come on up front. You could stand right here by the doors for a second.
Tom G has a question. How long have we been giving these fan appreciation weekends?
So we started the first one in May of 2018. We didn't do very many of them because we were still trying to find our way. We really got sidetracked by COVID. We were closed for most of 2019. We opened up again in October of 2020, and we opened up with a Halloween walkthrough, and we started up again in January, and we do one of these a week. And I mentioned we don't charge anything to come in, or one a month. Yes, one a month. And so we try to do these on a regular basis, and we're actually booked out to May. And because of the summer, and unfortunately this area is not air conditioned, we don't open in 3 months or so of the summer. It's just too hot.
Quick request.
Yes.
Somebody from Ottawa says, let me take another look at the engineering console.
Chris, would you do me a favor and shut those lights right behind you? Back to the program. So we talked about the fact that Star Trek was about saving money, right? And they came up with these ideas of the doors. Well, these doors were open when we walked in, but these doors are closed. And there was a person, this I mentioned before, Royal Weaver. Royal's been with us 13 years or thereabouts. And he was a big part of the construction and production of fan films here. And actually, there have been about 40 fan films here, including Star Trek Continues, Starship Farragut, Dreadnought Dominion, Tales from the Neutral Zone, Avalon Universe, and a host of independents. So it's an active film studio that we're standing in here. But the whole idea of the concept of the sliding doors is nothing more than pulleys and strings. And unfortunately, it's manually run. So you'd need somebody like poor Royal standing behind the door, waiting for a cue. And when they gave the cue, then the doors would be pulled open. And when everybody walked through, the doors would be pulled closed.
And that's not John Delancey cue either.
That's not John Delancey cue.
Different series.
Right, exactly. Pre-John Delancey. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to give the cue, which is just doors, but don't give it yet. When you say doors, the doors are going to open, okay? I will mention this to everybody. You guys have been here before, that when you look at this, look straight ahead because it looks like you're in a television set. The other thing to mention to everybody, again, you guys have probably heard this, is when the doors open for a split second, you may feel like you're 10 years old again, or whatever age you were when you first fell in love with Star Trek. You might remember who you were with, what you were watching, where you were, but for that brief second, you're going to find yourself a kid again. So let's bring you up, Dan. And if you guys would just face forward, and you can come in a bit. You want to come in a bit? You good, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, so cue.
Doors.
And you could actually walk in. We'll go up to the red line here. So here we are in the corridor. You'll notice a couple of things, by the way, more plantons on the wall, and you'll see them as we go through, and we'll talk a little bit about them towards the end. You'll notice the corridor is rounded, and that's because the main section of the Enterprise was supposed to be circular. So it had to give the appearance that you were walking around the ship. The other thing that was unusual about Star Trek in 1966 was that all of the sets were connected to the corridor. So you could walk into the transporter room, you could walk into sickbay, you could do that. Up until then, and actually even today, if you're filming a TV show or even a movie, and your characters are in the kitchen and they're going to move to the dining room, you actually have to walk off that set, walk some amount of distance to another set, and then set up in there. So this was different because the camera person could actually follow the actor wherever they were going right into the next set. Very different for the time. The other thing is, and a question that gets asked occasionally is, how do you know the dimensions of everything? How do you know how wide the corridor is or how big a transporter pad is supposed to be? And the answer is, well, they're not on the blueprints, so you don't know the dimensions from the blueprints. But you try to find something that has a common denominator, a common size. And if you're building a set as complex as Star Trek did 55 years ago, you're not cutting wood or you're not cutting things to be specific. You're trying to use what you can in the way you get it. So if anybody's ever done any construction, home construction, business construction, you've probably bought plywood. And plywood generally comes in one size. Anybody? 4x8. 4x8. 4 feet by 8 feet. So plywood comes by 4 feet by 8 feet. If you can find something that's 4x8, you can calculate everything else in size. So if you look around, do you see anything that's 4x8? 4x8, 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 4x8. So if you know that that's the dimension, you can calculate that the corridor is 8 feet wide. You can figure out that a transporter pad is 18 inches across. And that's how you do it. Because if you don't do it to scale, it's not going to look right to the eye. It's either going to be too large or too small. And it's not going to look good on film because you're trying to recreate what you saw on television. So we're going to go in here now. I will tell you this. This is supposed to be Dr. McCoy's office. Star Trek Continues did not have an unlimited budget. So if they didn't have a story, and they did film 11, but if they didn't have a story that required a set, they didn't build it. So they never needed Dr. McCoy's office. To the right of it would have been all the medical labs. Well, they didn't need medical labs. So they left this open, which becomes valuable real estate because if you need a temporary set, you could build it. You don't have to worry about taking up the room, and you could break it down and put your items in storage. So we're going to walk in here and go left, and we're going to be in sickbay. And you can walk all the way down, I have to say it, by the Romulan bridge. So again, this is what you would have seen at Paramount. You'll notice that we've got the beds. We certainly have the medical scanner and the display up at the top. Well, that was all a new concept. That was an idea for the future. And many of you know that items that Star Trek created have become reality. So your cell phone is a communicator. Your cell phone is also your tricorder because it operated the same way as the tricorder where you could get information from some other source. So creation has become reality. They're actually experimenting with this type of equipment where someone would lay on a cot, they would scan that person without doing anything intrusive, and the readings would show up on a screen. So they would immediately know the good, the bad, and the ugly about you. You'll notice that our displays are static. In today's world, if that was going to be active, it would be done with CGI after the fact in post-processing. But in 1966, believe it or not, when you saw all the arrows going up and down and the lights blinking, there was a couple of people behind the scenes doing this. That's what they were doing. But technology's obviously become a long way. You notice the material on the beds, the bright red, the bright gold. that material, we talked about things that are available and no longer available. Can't find this material anymore. It was probably prevalent in the 1960s, and in some episodes, they even had it in blue. So it was probably very active, but they didn't have it. And after filming 2 episodes using sickbay in Star Trek Continues, when they used this sort of dull orange gold material that they found, Vic thought, well, if we're going to do this and we're going to do this right and we're going to make more episodes, let's try to make it as close to the original as possible. So he found a textile maker. They took screen caps of the material from the episodes, and the guy created this material. So you're going to see it throughout the set, but I venture to say you're probably not going to see it in too many other places.
Ray, for whatever it's worth, to raise money, Star Trek Continues actually made and sold some of these pillows.
Sorry, I wasn't
Out
around.
there.
I would have loved to have one of those for my bed, but I don't have one. I could steal one, but I'm not going to do it. Any questions about sickbay? Sickbay? Any questions on sickbay? Nothing? All right, we're going to keep on walking.
There is one question from Kathy. Are those bed frames floating? They are hinged right about there, but we locked them down for obvious reasons. That was the design back in the 60s. You may remember the beds could be placed upright, like the diagnostic, but those are locked down for safety reasons.
Exactly. Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll keep walking, and we'll go down this corridor, and our next stop is going to be the transporter room. So come on in. Best spot is behind the console. You good? Having fun? All right, just checking. So let's talk about the transporter room a little bit. You know, we talked about the fact that you know what the dimensions are of things, and the transporter pads are 18 inches across. But what are they? Well, they're actually lenses from something called a Fresnel lens, which is a giant light in the 60s that would light sets. And 55 years ago, you may have had hundreds and hundreds of them at Paramount, wherever you were filming. They still exist today, but they're in very smaller numbers, and they're very costly. One of those would actually be about $3,000 times 6. It's a lot of money nobody needed to spend. So Vic knew of a producer in California who owned a Fresnel lens. He borrowed the lens. He made a cast. And so those are resin cast pieces. And you can actually stand on them. So if you do want to stand on them, you can and take a picture. And you guys will have plenty of time to come on back and take pictures. But that's what that is. The other thing, which I'm going to do now, I'll do it a little out of sequence because you'll need to be back in the back in a second. But just come on out here for a second, Dan. So you'll notice this moire pattern around the back and the sides. And I learned things after 55 years that I didn't know. So what is it? What is it? I mean, it looks like it's plastic. You know, who knows really what it was, but now we know. And again, it's one of those items that you could still buy today. So I don't know if you can hear this online. Maybe you can, but listen to this. Very thin, paper thin, right? It is. And if you want to think about the 1960s, you want to think about music, you want to think about groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Ringo, that is drum skin. That is the skin that goes around a bass drum or a snare drum, and you can find them in different colors. They use the white and the gray, and it's still available, so we were able to reproduce it. Drum skins. So the other question that sometimes comes up is, how did they come up with the idea of the transporter? Right? Who invented it? We're not quite sure exactly who invented it, but how did they come up with the idea? And again, in the goal of saving money, and if you think about it, Star Trek's Enterprise was like an 11 or 12-foot solid model. And the cost of trying to get that to land on a planet every week would be enormous. And what would that planet look like? And how would it land? And how would you do all of that? And it just wasn't feasible. And somebody in the production department said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could just get our actors from one place to another in a couple of seconds and not lose any footage? And the transporter was born. And I would guess that there probably isn't a person around the world right now that doesn't know what beam me up means. Questions in the transporter room? Nope, we're good. We'll keep on going. So the next set we come to is the briefing room. But before we go inside, just take a look at this plaque for a second. This was what was in the original series. So if you take a look at this plaque, you'll see that it says transporter room 2. Briefing room 2. Why briefing room 2? Because they wanted to make you think that the ship was bigger than it was, and there were more than one briefing room, more than one transporter, more than one turbo lift. So they would give it a number, and just to disguise the fact that the ship wasn't as big as you would think it was on television. So let's come on into the briefing room, and we'll talk about a couple of things in here as well. So you'll notice the briefing room table. First question I'll ask is, what's missing? What's missing? Chairs. Just like the original series, if you didn't have to buy more than you needed, then you only bought the amount you needed. And if you think about it, you're only filming in one set at a time. So if you're filming here, you're not filming on the bridge. So you'll see the chairs in a little bit, but we'd steal them from the bridge and put them wherever we needed them. This was a very important room to every production from 1966 up to today. And it was a very important room because it was a swing room, which means it could be something else. It could be made into something else. So if you watch the original series and you recognize this is the briefing room and you see those arches on the side, when you're watching the original series on television going forward, if you see those arches, it's this room. This room became a rec room. You take the table out, you put in a couple of small round tables, you put a food replicator up on the wall, you put in lower cut chairs, 3D chess, round playing cards, cup of coffee, and now you've got a rec room. It was also the chapel in Balance of Terror, where Kirk was supposed to marry the couple at the beginning of the episode. And what they did was they put up a wall here, they put a little station here with a stanchion, and that's where Kirk stood to do the ceremony. A couple of kneelers, a couple of benches. They put a door over there, and now they had a chapel. And I think it's actually been used in more than that, but those are the sort of the obvious ones. Something else about Star Trek was that, when they were doing the episodes, they were trying to get an episode out every week on television, every week. So they didn't care about moving things around, right? Today, it's 55 years later, and we've all seen the episodes hundreds of times, if not more. And so when we see something out of place now, we go, well, it doesn't belong on that wall, that belongs on that wall. Well, they didn't care about that. And the best example is the one I'm going to give you. In The Naked Time, which is where the crew gets infected by a disease that's transmitted through touch. There's a scene towards the end where Spock is in the briefing room, and he's crying and lamenting because he says he couldn't love his mother. And Kirk comes and finds him, and Kirk is starting to get the disease. So they're standing over here by the entrance, and Kirk is trying to get Spock to snap out of it. So he's hitting across the face. And finally, Spock's had enough, and he hauls off, and he knocks Kirk over the table, and Kirk gets up, and he confronts Spock like this. Watch it again. When they're here, and Kirk is doing this, you see everything on the table. When Kirk goes flying across the table, there's nothing on it. Nothing on it. When Kirk gets back up and comes here, everything's back on the table. It's all Hollywood. It's all Hollywood. I've got one last thing to point out in here, which I find very cool, and I did not know until recently. So Gene Roddenberry envisioned Starfleet as the Navy, which means Starship had to be a naval vessel. Now, it's obviously intentional, but so hidden that nobody's really ever seen it. The table. Look at the table. Look at the shape of the table. That's an aircraft carrier. That's an aircraft carrier. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? And they just set it up so that you'd sit around the table and nobody would be any worse to wear. So they were really innovative in what they did. All right. We'll find out what that is. Okay. So here we are. Any questions about the transporter, about the briefing room? Okay. Let's keep going. Whoever's drilling, don't drill. Let's keep on going. And we'll go left, and we're going to find ourselves in auxiliary control. And you may not have seen auxiliary control much in the original series, but you would recognize it from the place where the landing party from the Enterprise in the station. But this really is another one of those swing rooms that's valuable property. It's been a bar. It's been guest quarters. It's been a courtroom. All you do is redress the walls. You block off things with curtains. You might even put colored carpet tile on the floor, and you have a completely different look. Completely different look. As Dan goes around the back, more plantons on the wall. Here's some of those round tables that we talked about that you'd see in the rec room. We made this one on the side look like where you'd see a Commodore trying to contact a crewman on a view screen. So actually, sir, could you sit in that chair? You're my Commodore. And this is what you'd see. This is what you'd see. And it'd be a person in some uniform or costume. You'd have the background. You'd have a table by where they're sitting. You might not have a victim who's been turned into a cube, but that's okay. But this is what you'd see. Any questions about aux control?
Swing says this has been used as an admiral's
Yes.
office as well in Star Trek Continues.
Yep.
With Erin Gray and her desk right there. So, some interesting people. And also, a certain guy in green had a fight scene.
Lou Ferrigno, in an episode of Star Trek Continues, had a fight scene with Vic as Kirk. And it was, my understanding was, it was the first time that Lou was green since he played the Incredible Hulk.
4 hours to put the makeup on.
So this has been a very useful room. Very useful room. And actually, we're going to be doing a fan film, hopefully before summer. And we're going to use this room and turn it into a cargo bay. So it gets very creative. Questions? Questions on aux control? Any questions, Dan? Guess not. Okay. Let's keep on going right across the hall. And here we are in the guest quarters. It's set up as the captain's quarters right now, but this is the guest quarters. Come on in, Heygo people. So this is how you would have seen it. These also became swing rooms. So this is the configuration if it was Kirk's room. If Spock was here, then they would take the bed that's in the corner there. They would put the bed here. They'd put the desk there. And now you've got what looks like a different location. You've got what looks like a different location. We've decorated it because we're not the Enterprise. I figured the Enterprise belonged to another generation. So we are the Constitution. So things don't have to look just like Star Trek. We can explain it away. But you'll see more of that material on the bed. You'll see more of that material on the side patterns, just as decoration. You'll see this. You'd probably recognize this dresser from Uhura's quarters. And we've just kind of tried to make it a little homing for everybody. So here's a little bit of movie magic. A little bit of movie magic. 55 years ago, we talked about lights being huge. Well, cameras were huge. So you couldn't have a person standing here with a camera looking that way because the lens would be like out here, might be out here. And you've probably seen in the original series, Kirk sitting at his desk and the buzzer goes off. And there's this great shot of Spock or great shot of McCoy outside the door. And the question is, well, how did they get it if they couldn't fit the camera? Well, the answer is this. Not as scary, but that's what they did. They would have a hole in the wall and they put the camera there. That's pretty good, Royal. Can't wait to close this. And so they'd take their shot. They'd just take everything out of the way. They'd take their shot. And when they were done, they'd hide Royal. And nobody would know that there was a hole in the wall. Good? Questions?
Well, Ray V says the detail is fantastic.
Thank you, Ray. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. If that's the Ray V I know, he knows very well. So here we are at the end of the corridor. You'll notice a turbo lift. And by the way, that's turbo lift 7, I believe. Again, the illusion is that there's a lot of turbo lifts on the ship, which there should be, right? Let's talk for a second about plantons. So, the idea is that this is a background piece. So if the actor's standing here and doing his dialogue to the camera, if the viewer is looking at this and not the actor, then the actor's not doing the job or the story's not right, because this should be nothing more than background. But what are these really sometimes made out of? Take a look at this one. Take a look at this one. And if you look hard enough or close enough, here's a little painter's box, right? Plumbing, plumbing, plumbing. A wheel from a chair. Unfortunately, nobody told them that the wheel was missing until they sat on it. Wheel from a chair, piece of wood. Piece of wood. Doesn't mean anything. You paint it, you plant it on the wall.
Yeah, I sat in that chair too without the wheel.
Wouldn't doubt it. I'm sure it was done intentionally too. We'll come this way, and we're really sort of at the end, like I said, of the corridor. And this is the Jeffries Tube. And you may recognize the Jeffries Tube from a couple of episodes, probably most notably in the Doomsday Machine, where Scotty had to climb into the tube, which is an offshoot of engineering, so that he could get the transporters back online. A couple of things about the Jeffries Tube. So the first question is, why is it called the Jeffries Tube? And some of you, I'm sure, know the answer, but the designer of almost everything in Star Trek was Matt Jeffries. And he designed ships, weapons, sets. He did almost everything, Matt Jeffries. And they needed something that looked different, that Scotty could climb up and do some work in. So he developed this. He created this. And when they came time to use it, they said, well, what do we call it? And somebody said, well, it's Jeffries Tube. So the name just stuck, Jeffries Tube. The other thing that's a little cool, and this is a little bit of Star Trek memorabilia, so to speak, you'll notice the pipes, right? They're all fake pipes. And some of them have designations on them. A79, I think there's a B12, RMM. Those designations mean nothing. They don't mean anything. They're just decoration. There's something that does mean something, and it's over here in the corner, and it says GNDN. And a lot of people know what that means. What is GNDN? Well, it was a joke amongst the production people, and it's been used in series and televisions and movies ever since. And GNDN stands for, if you could show me, Dan, because I want to say it to everybody, GNDN stands for goes nowhere, does nothing. So for what it's worth, that's a joke amongst the production people of Star Trek. And we come here to the end, and this is really where engineering should have been. But, we only had 10,000 square feet, so we can only build it where it would fit. Paramount had, who knows what, 50,000, 100,000 square feet. So this is where engineering would have been. But we took it to engineering first. This is our brig, because what's a starship or a naval vessel without a brig? Interestingly enough, and this is built the same way that the original series was, and it's just Christmas lights inside, but it gives the impression that has somebody locked in. But think about it for a second. If you're filming someone in a jail cell, right? Well, there's a jail cell in front of you, or sometimes there's a door with a little latch on it so you could look inside. So you can never really see the actor. The actor's always hidden by some part of the set. Here, the actor would be in jail, but you could see the actor full face, for whatever it's worth.
10 minutes to go, sir.
All right. Well, here we go. So we're at the end of this leg of the tour, of the walkthrough, and we're going to walk around the corner, and I hope you guys are pleasantly surprised. Come on in, guys. Here we are on the bridge, and you'll see that it's been reproduced in very much exacting detail. Very much. Got our blinking lights on the side. We've got Spock station over in the corner, obviously the helm and the captain's chair. We've created, since I've been here, although they had one, but it was broken, Sulu scope. So we can imagine where Sulu was stationed and looking into the scope. This is our main view screen, which was built in May. That's the last real piece of construction, although I'll let everybody on this video, on this live stream, and the guys here know that next weekend we have a gentleman by the name of Gary Davis coming, who does Dreadnought Dominion, and he's building two new captain's chairs to replace the one that is there now. And the two of them will be a hero chair, which means it's the chair we'll use for filming. And the second chair will actually be a working chair with working buttons and lights and sound. So we'll put it up here for people to be able to use and sit in and have a little bit of fun. So you guys, you're very free to take pictures, sit in the captain's chair, sit at the helm, whatever you guys would like to do, please feel free to do it. Okay. And again, if you like what you see and you'd like to leave a donation, that would be great. And we've got, by the way, behind us, Scotty, why don't you walk up there onto the bridge? We have a special guest, a friend of the studio. His name is Charles Gordon, but you probably think he's either Captain Montgomery Scott or James Doohan. But he has been a friend of the studio since we opened up here in 2018. He's here all the time, and he's always here as Scotty.
one question of interest: why is the bridge offset? The turbo lift being over the shoulder. I think it's for shooting purposes. You want to be able to turn around and talk to your crew members and not talk to a door.
And that's actually part of the reason. And it's right. This has been a debate amongst Star Trek people. So that's actually the back of the ship. And so the ship really goes in this direction. I don't know if you can see my hand, but the ship actually goes from the door right about to where everybody's standing here. So when the ship gets stopped suddenly, and if you would stay with me, Dan, if the ship stops suddenly, everybody would do this. When in reality, they should have done this. So the question is, why is it there? I think Dan's got the right answer. I think it was more for shooting purposes. But if you look at the blueprints, you'll see that it was designed to have the turbo lift there and the bridge offset. And by the way, I've been a Star Trek fan since September 1966. I've managed to meet many of the original cast and crew. So William Shatner, I met Leonard Nimoy, Nichelle Nichols, George Takei, lots of other people, Rene Auberjois from Deep Space Nine. So lots of people. James Doohan was able to meet. Gene Roddenberry and Majel Barrett. I was at the first Star Trek convention in 1972 in New York and had a chance to meet them, along with sharing an elevator with Isaac Asimov. So, you know, a lot of things that I've been privileged to do as part of Star Trek, not necessarily as the owner of the studio, but part of Star Trek. And I took on the role of ownership here. I bought it from Vic in 2018. And I took on the role of ownership because these sets need to be preserved, right? It would be a shame if these had to be torn down and you guys didn't have a chance to be here. So, that's my role now. And it's been very rewarding with a lot of people that have come through here. Sometimes humbling. We sometimes take part of the bridge that's on the road with a backdrop. And you give an opportunity for people to see something that they never thought they'd see in their lifetime, really. So that's why I do what I do. So if you guys, oops, somebody turned the lights off. Go ahead, Dan. There we go. There we go. So if you guys certainly on Heygo would like to leave a tip, we would really appreciate it. I don't know if you hit the tip button, Dan. Okay. So we would appreciate it. We thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank you guys on Heygo for being part of this. You guys are free to stay and do whatever you like. Take pictures. You can walk back and take pictures. It's completely open. But thank you guys, and I appreciate it. Our next Heygo live stream is the second weekend of December. I believe that might be December 11th. And that tour is going to be run by Vic Mignogna, who is the creator and the showrunner of Star Trek Continues. So thank you guys. Appreciate it for you guys being here. And as I say sometimes, we'll see you at the movies. Thanks. Thank you, guys.
If you'd like a picture with